Welcome again to today's webinar, How to Automate Endpoint Hardening. This is an automation webinar, so while we do have some slides here to set up some thought leadership and process stuff, we are going to focus the majority of our webinar today on being actually in the NinjaOne platform, showing you how to build out automations around endpoint hardening. We're really excited to deliver this type of webinar because we've gotten really good feedback on them, and we want to use them to help you get more out of the NinjaOne platform, particularly in this case around endpoint hardening and security. So we are going to spend a lot of time right in the platform. Before we get started on that, I do want to highlight this webinar will be recorded and we will send out the recording ahead of time. And we also encourage as much interaction as possible. So we do have our chat. Please hop in there, say hi, interact, share your own feedback and thoughts. And then we also do have a Q&A section at the end. Hopefully we'll have time for Q&A. If you want to go ahead and pop your questions in there, you can vote on them, and we will start by responding to those higher voted questions that more people are interested in. We will also try to respond in chat as we go. With that, I think we can go. Oh, and then we did promise, I believe, 3 Yeti mugs at the end. So if you hang with us until Q&A, we will be giving out those 3 Yeti mugs to our attendees. With that, now I'm going to go ahead and introduce the team today. My name is Pete Bretton. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at NinjaOne, and I'm joined by Jeff and Steven. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jeff Hunter. I am the Sales Engineer Manager for the MSP channel here at NinjaOne.
Hey everyone, Stephen Murphy. I'm the Senior Technical Advisor for the community team and also one of the product managers.
I think we can do better than that. Jeff Hunter is our absolute best Ninja user. He does all this heavy technical lifting on showing you guys how to use the Ninja platform better on most of our webinars and our partner office hours. And Stephen Murphy was an MSP leader for many years. I don't know how many years. I don't want to age you, Stephen. And really is engaged with our community, helping them use the NinjaOne platform better. And we thought we could use his expertise today to really talk about endpoint hardening, because he's been there and done that. So he's a great resource for you to reach out to as well. With that, I think we can actually jump into the content. Again, we will be on slides for a few minutes, but then we'll jump right into the platform. So why are we talking about device hardening? Well, device hardening is a core factor of security solution effectiveness. The investment you make in device hardening is going to have way larger return on investment than many other things you can do from a security perspective. The very fundamentals of cyber hygiene and device hardening are really impactful on every other security action that you take. If you don't do this well, every other tool you have and every other solution you put in place and every other security step you take is going to have to be better and work harder and have fewer gaps to be effective. So what we're talking about today, device hardening, is really foundational to building and delivering a security strategy for your clients, for your end users, for your company, depending on your role and whether you're an MSP or an IT team. So this is really foundational to your security strategy. And a lot of times, I feel like when I talk to people and I say device hardening, there's a little bit of like, what exactly do you mean? And so we really want to set that groundwork for what it is, why it's impactful, and what you can do about it. We're also talking about this because the fundamentals still need work. What you have here is a chart of 4 major English-speaking countries, because I happen to only speak English and it was easier to pull that information. And the guidance that they give SMBs and mid-market companies on the fundamentals of endpoint security. What you'll see here is that there's a ton of overlap between these 4 countries and their recommendations they make, because these are the recommendations that are going to have the biggest bang for your buck. If you are delivering on these, you are going to have a much greater return on your security investment than any other strategies that you may pursue from a security perspective. And nothing here should blow your mind. If you've spent any time in IT and any time in security, all of these will be things you've heard a million times, right? Take backups, patch applications in your operating system. Make sure you have visibility and control over the applications that are used in your environment. Make sure you're enforcing passwords and MFA. Make sure you're using anti-malware solutions or next-gen AV or EDR. Make sure you're enabling the firewall on your devices, that sort of thing. Nothing here should blow anyone's mind, but it's important to remember that there are many environments where all of this is not being enforced. And when it's not being enforced, you are leaving your maybe more advanced security solutions to pick up the slack. And so again, part of the reason we're talking about this is because these fundamentals really do need work in a lot of environments. To reinforce that, I actually pulled some information from a recent Microsoft report. It was called the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, around key cyber resiliency issues and the percentage of respondents in their survey that did not have these that did have issues with these cyber resiliency attributes, I guess. So in this survey that they did, almost half of their customers didn't have usable backups. More than half, or just about 50%, had unmanaged or legacy systems. There were a lot that weren't using EDR. There were a lot that didn't have effective processes in place to patch their endpoints and minimize vulnerabilities. Local admin password controls were essentially non-existent, and almost every single customer of theirs had excessive admin credentials that were found by the team. So this is just a small subset. It's a great report. I recommend going out and reading it. But it shows you that those fundamentals that we're talking about, the fundamentals of endpoint security, the initial device hardening that's so critical, just isn't being done. And there's one more stat from that I really want to highlight, and I think can be helpful here to kind of ramp up why this is important. And that's, if you are delivering on the fundamentals of cyber hygiene, if you're hardening your endpoints, if you're enforcing passwords, if you have backups in place, if you are ensuring that you have control over the endpoints in your environment, these things are going to help protect you against 98% of attacks. That's a number that's coming from Microsoft. It's not coming from Ninja. But it's really, really important and impactful, because if you are delivering on these things, every other security step that you take is going to have to work less hard, be less perfect. And that allows you to really build the layers and layers of security that are going to help protect your environments. And that's a really fundamental finding from that report that I think speaks to why what we're talking about today is so important. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen to really dive into the core content here. Oh, Lisa, can we switch back to slides, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. So I'm just going to kind of intro this into some common terms, and the first start of this is, what does a device hardening actually mean? And ultimately, these key terms do have kind of drastic definitions depending on where we're looking at. But for Ninja's perspective from this webinar, patching ultimately relies on, when we're patching the operating system, it's going to be around the core operating system, be it Windows, Mac, Linux, etc. And ultimately keeping that up to date, making sure that we're patched, it's going to reduce your CVEs and exposure. You might not necessarily have a tool to measure that, such as Nessus or any of the other vulnerability scanners, but ultimately getting those patches out there is going to ensure that your risk is reduced and that you're not as vulnerable as everyone else that's out there. Diving into that as well, and tied extremely closely, is the application management aspects. So we've all got our Windows, our Mac, etc., desktop devices, laptops, etc., our server infrastructure, and on there we have applications loaded, be it SQL servers, we've got our Microsoft Office applications, and beyond. We've got, some of us have really lovely line of business apps, and ultimately knowing what we have, the state that it's in terms of its version, its patch level, etc., we're going to know what we have on our estate and be able to go out there and dive into which pieces are or might be vulnerable. Beyond that, we can kind of dive into the actual application patching that's on there, and we can kind of control it and release those as we get appropriate patches. Once we're onto that, everyone has our local devices out there. We have our users that are on those devices. They may be separate from Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, or whatever form of directory you've got in the background. And maintaining the visibility of that and knowing what's out there on those devices is one of the key set of controls. In terms of device configuration management, rolling it out there, knowing what GPUs, what Intune settings, what registry keys you've got tweaked at particular points, it's another key aspect around controlling how a device is configured, what the software is actually configured to do. You may well be doing things like locking down a USB memory stick, for example, or you may well be tweaking Outlook so that certain file types cannot be opened. Diving into that as well, we've also got backup. having that ability that if we ever are breached, if we have a ransomware incident or worse, we have a malicious user on the network who's deleting corporate data, we can control that. We can have that snapshot back in time and restore that data. In terms of that, next slide, Pete.
Oh.
And this is just a subset, and it's a cut down version of the overall kind of risk matrix when you're looking at information security. So we are focusing solely on these endpoints. You can sort of wrap servers into this as well, because you can harden them down, especially if they're remote desktop servers and you've got users logging onto them, but typically you might have a slightly different approach for that. Thanks, Pete. I've just seen the comment in the chat. But yeah, in terms of that as well, we do have a wide array of other third-party aspects we need to keep in touch with, such as our IAM. And when we're looking at identity access management, we may well be diving into Azure Active Directory itself, and kind of plugging on extras like conditional access, multi-factor authentication. And your RMM typically doesn't do that, but in essence, if you can get those kind of extra bolt-ons, it's going to be great. Ensure that the users are getting prompted appropriately, and they're out of network. Is this really John Smith who's logging on from this location? Let's prompt their mobile and make sure they're there. Beyond that, we're looking at advanced security solutions, such as your advanced AV, your EDR. You may even well be feeding this into a SIM platform and taking the logs. And once you've kind of got that, you can start doing your threat intelligence and breaking down the reports and queries that are there. And if you're one of these people who does like to dive into the logs, they're great to do so. Once we're in beyond that, key aspect for everyone, get some security awareness training. I'm not on about the kind of tricky send a spam message out and make sure you're tricking the users, but get them some realistic examples. Make sure you're taking them through how people are tricking them, the emotional responses they're trying to trigger with individuals, such as there'll always be an urgent requirement or a need. I'm not going to swear, but in a previous job role, I had a really lovely one from a supposed lawyer, overdue invoice that we had not paid apparently, never heard of them. And then they ended it off to trigger an emotional response. They had a very nice sort of expletive followed by, we'll never deal with you again. And what they're trying to trigger here is, I've got an upset customer driving into, let's try and trigger Stephen to go and open this and react to it in a way you wouldn't normally kind of think about it. There's many more kind of aspects to this, but yeah, in terms of that, Pete, let's go to the next slide, because it's not really worth going into every point.
Yeah, sure thing. One thing I want to say about the last two slides, the what's included and what isn't. Again, going back to when I say device hardening, a lot of times people, they know what I'm saying, but they don't necessarily know what I'm saying. So having these two slides is really there to help you break out what we're talking about versus what we're not. This second slide, all this stuff is super important, and it's probably, each could probably have their own webinar. Part of the point is, we're going to focus on that device hardening section in the platform. And yeah, we'll go on to the next slide here.
And then we're driving into the actual example of device hardening activities. This is going to be a great slide if you want to take a screenshot. I appreciate that Lisa has already linked the kind of more in-depth document that we did last year. But if you get yourself into that document and this slide, it's a starting subset for you to go and look at. I'm always going to say that this isn't just a one-off process. This is something to iterate and always kind of go back and check. The baselines are always changing, and you'll see that sort of quarterly or every up to about a year, they will kind of go through and refresh them, and they'll introduce new security controls that you can roll out. You go have a look, they might be relating to a group policy, which is ultimately a registry key, and you can roll that out at scale in the platform, and we're going to just go into that and show you. But in terms of that, just go out there, pick one item, work on it, dive into it, and make sure you can get a repeatable solution via PowerShell, Batch, or however you're deploying it in a script form, or you might be doing it in GPO, and you can roll that out to your test group. Make sure it doesn't break any kind of line of business, critical apps, and then roll it out at scale. It's a lovely process to kind of go and lock these little pieces down. And it's the same with pretty much all of our devices. If we're going to be blocking USB memory sticks, yep, let's go and block that. If we're going to be deploying our antivirus, let's go and put it out there and monitor that it's actually deployed. And jumping into these kind of real world examples that are kind of out here, I've had some really key ones out of this that are really critical, and they really do help when an end user is involved. If you have a look at sort of going down and reducing your port exposures, especially if you're out there and got users on public Wi-Fi. Make sure the firewall isn't disabled. You want to expand on the logging that's happening. And also, you kind of want to look at these exposed services that are out there on the device, such as SMB version 1 or Telnet HTTP. If you've got any kind of devices out there that are endpoint facing that have those services, do you really need them? Is there a business need to have them open? You can understand possibly a developer having HTTP, but someone from the admin team who's on reception, possibly not. And ultimately, you can feed that into any platform, roll it out, and then kind of step back and say, yes, this is rolled out successfully. It's reduced our risk. What's the next piece of the process we can follow?
Yeah, there's some comments here in chat I just want to address. Ben Weeks asked, like, what if we're running apps that still require SMBv1? Or Caleb mentioned, should default admin accounts be disabled instead? The point here is these are ideas that we've seen in the wild that our partners have used. You have to adjust everything you see here to your own environment, right? The point is these are some things you can do. And if you need SMBv1 turned on, then you need it turned on. If you can disable your default admin accounts, absolutely do that. Or maybe you can change them. The point is to give you ideas that you can go and adapt to your own environment. These are certainly not prescriptive. We're not telling you to go do all of these things.
Yep, and you're totally right, Pete. It is a sliding scale. And what's right for my environment will be totally different to someone else's environment. You might not be able to disable SMBv1. You've got a prime example in healthcare. We had scanners that were, they couldn't go beyond Windows XP. And, no one's going to go out there and replace a multi-million pound or dollar kind of machine just on a whim like that. It's something that you need to go up. You need to have your champions kind of advocating for this and getting a replacement long term.
Awesome. Let's go to the next slide here. So we're just going to go ahead from here. We're going to be in the NinjaOne platform from now on. So I told you we wouldn't beat you over the head with slides. We're going to go over 5 examples today because this is an automation workshop. These will be step-by-step approaches to these 5 device hardening things that you may want to do in a tool like Ninja. So deploying device security configurations on device setup, enabling, expanding, and parsing logs, enabling device firewall and blocking outbound net connections, creating a local admin account and automating password rotation, and then detecting and removing potentially malicious remote access solutions. There's a high-level description of the 5 things we're going to go over, but from here on out, we can hand it off to Jeff, and you can see it live.
Thank you for that, Pete. And as Pete was saying earlier, it is helpful to think in terms of device hardening by having as many layers as possible. Preventing potential compromises is a little bit like pouring water on concrete. You want to try to find every crack and every crevice that you possibly can. And so we're going to talk about a few basic options for ensuring the most common vectors for compromise are protected against. Your security is really only good when it's actually turned on. Case in point, my neighbor had his car stolen, and it wasn't because somebody smashed the window or picked the lock or did a key fob intercept. It's because he left his keys in his car. And I think this is an example that carries over into the IT world, which is that the most potentially dangerous attack vector is the user themselves. And so how do we alleviate the potential danger from an uneducated or unsuspecting user using tools that are built into Windows? And as a side note, security awareness training is always a good thing, but not necessarily what I want to talk about today. So let's start with a very basic example. Something that is built into any modern Windows 10 or Windows 11 workstation is BitLocker. And that's something that Ninja natively tracks in terms of the status. So if we come into our search menu here, we can see our machines. And then under additional filters, we have BitLocker status. So if we want to find anybody who has BitLocker disabled, we can. Now, if I want to further limit this down, maybe I don't want to do any servers. I want to just do my workstations right now. I can go ahead and select just workstations. And I could also limit this down by an organization or location. You have a lot of granularity in this this method here by creating a search group. I know that there was some talk earlier about maybe you don't want to take device hardening actions across all your customers. There might be certain devices that require something like SMB1. So this gives you a little bit more granularity in how you're making sure that you have BitLocker in compliance across most of your environment, or SMB1 disabled across most of your environment, but not where it's going to potentially break something. Now, this is something that's very useful just for informational purposes. This is a dynamic group, so this is always going to show you up-to-date information. As you enable BitLocker on these machines, they're going to fall out of this group. As you onboard new machines that don't have BitLocker enabled, they're going to show up in this group. But aside from the informational aspect, we want some remediation here. We want some automation that we can set and forget. And so we'll go into administration, and then we'll come down to task. And then with our scheduled task to enable BitLocker, we're going to not statically select the devices that we want to have BitLocker enabled on. We're actually going to use the search group that we just created to go ahead and do the heavy lifting in terms of identifying what machines need to run the enable BitLocker script based on the search group that we just created. So I'm going to go ahead and run this every Friday at 6 o'clock, a little bit after quitting time. Take note of the time that we're using right here is PST. This is enable BitLocker. And then in terms of targets, you can see 3 different options. The top 2 here are static. So all devices or all Windows devices in an organization, any devices that I want to kind of individually select. The groups option is where Ninja is doing that heavy lifting for you. Again, taking the search group, taking those search parameters and targeting as many devices that are in that group. I saw there was something in there about my screen not being clear. Is that an issue?
Hey, Lisa, can we unshare and reshare Jeff's screen?
Any better?
It's still a little blurry.
Let me make it a little bit bigger then. So that's one way we can do a compliance automation for BitLocker. There's, of course, a million examples that you could potentially do with this. Some of that are built into Ninja that we have by default. Would be something like disabling the mass storage element when somebody plugs in a USB drive. That was something that definitely would have been useful for me in the past. One of the first things I did about 12 years ago in a previous position was follow a tech who had been using the same USB drive to upgrade servers at all locations, and there was malware on the USB drive. So I kind of followed him around the state of Florida, having to clean that up and make sure that we were, all good on our server end. Another compliance automation you might take would be something like making sure that UAC is set. And that's something we can provide out of the box in our template library, which has a lot of really good scripts I would recommend checking out if you're already a Ninja partner. If we come in here, you'll see the option here to set UAC. Again, just adding an additional element of protection in place. We talked about our device onboarding webinar last month, and sort of you don't always know that the devices you are managing are standardized. It's not always that you are buying those machines. Sometimes you're taking over for another entity, and kind of making sure that you are standardized across the board can be really useful. We'll move on to our next example here, which is going to, again, be using the tools that we have at our disposal. And much like BitLocker, much like UAC, the Windows Firewall is available on all modern Windows operating systems. So let's take a look at how we can ensure that the firewall is enabled, and then maybe take a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth with what we can manage in terms of the firewall settings. So how are we going to enable or check on the firewall? First and foremost, we have a custom field that we have created. Custom fields in Ninja can be used in a variety of ways. In this particular way, I am using it to store the output of a PowerShell script. So I have a field down here named Firewall Status. This is accepting a PowerShell script that checks on the firewall status and writes it into this custom field. And then I can monitor that. So if I come into my policies here, and then go into my Wayland-Yutani policy here, building better worlds. You'll see that I have a scheduled script set up here to check my firewall status. In this case, I'm checking every hour, and then I'm just writing that into my custom field. Now that gets me the information that I need to then take an action. The actual action is going to be a condition right here. And we're monitoring that custom field for the firewall status. So in this case, if I see that any of the firewalls profiles on the machine are set to false, meaning uh, meaning that the firewall is disabled, I am then going to take an action. So this generates an alert and lets me know that I have a firewall that's down. But on the right-hand side, you can see that we are setting the Windows firewall. And this is using, again, a built-in script in Ninja from that template library. This is going to turn on the firewall. But again, let's go a little bit deeper here. Turning on the firewall is one thing, but maybe we want to use the firewall to enhance the protection. And in this case, I'm going to run a script that actually blocks some outbound network connections for common applications that can be used to perhaps exploit the system. For example, probably pretty rare that your Windows calculator needs to reach out to the internet, or that Notepad needs to reach out to the internet, or W script or C script. So you can go ahead and use that as an example of how you can sort of extend the functionality of the Windows firewall or other built-in tools into Windows. Now let's kind of take a different tactic here. We've talked about how we're trying to configure the device, but the device or the configuration is really only as good as the information that you are getting. So let's take a look at the logging. Know what's happening on the device. Default settings aren't necessarily what's best for security. So certain logs may need to be expanded so that you can have a good idea, an accurate reflection of the health and the security of your environment. Now, we're going to go ahead and use a script to expand the logs here, and these scripts will be posted in the Ninja Dojo shortly after this webinar. I know I'm referencing a lot of different scripts, and in the interest of time, I don't want to go down and break down all of them, but I will have links to a variety of Dojo articles that explain all the links that I'm going to be demonstrating inside of this webinar. Now, there's a couple different ways to ensure compliance here for your scripts that run. In this particular case, we've already seen a few different mechanisms. In this case, I'm going to run a scheduled script. And I'm actually going to go ahead and run this scheduled script on a very powerful scheduling option that we have inside of Ninja that is called Run Once Immediately. Like I said, extremely powerful. This runs on all devices that are on this policy. It runs when they're online right now. If I were to go ahead and add this script in right now, it'll run on any offline devices once they return to online status. And then finally, any new devices that join this policy, it's also going to go ahead and run on them. And so in this case, I'll go ahead and add in the option here to expand my logging. In the top right, I'll go ahead and add in my script here to expand my logging. And this is going to give me more information. It's going to expand the amount of logs. It's going to give me more depth into the logs. So really giving me a lot more information that I can look at and address the health of my environment, see where I need to make improvements. Obviously, if there is some sort of an attack, seeing sort of all that information, having that information available to you after the fact allows you to improve and make better decisions down the line. Now, aside from expanding the logs, that is a value add. I would also say that just monitoring the event viewer for privilege escalation is also going to be a great condition that you'll want to set up. If I come into my conditions here, this is everything that we're monitoring and alerting on. If I scroll down a little bit, you'll see security enabled group changed. So anytime there has been an escalation of an account, you can see that I am monitoring a variety of event IDs. As soon as one of these event IDs were to trigger, I would be able to be alerted that there has been a change in the privilege of a particular user. Now, there's no automated remediation here in this particular example. This is something that we did discuss in our advanced automation webinar from last year that I believe Stephen and I both did, which dealt around using custom fields, which we've talked about a little bit here, to essentially have a list of authorized administrators, check for anybody who is an unauthorized administrator by comparing that against a second custom field. And then if somebody shows up as a bad user, we'll go ahead and remove them, delete them from the account. You can see somewhat of an example right here where we have a list of all of our local users. We have a list of who is an authorized administrator, and then down here, our bad user who is not in the authorized admins custom field. If I had this turned on to do the self remediation of deleting this user, we would see this quickly disappear. I just have it turned off for demonstration purposes. Now, this is an example that I know I saw in the chat while Pete and Stephen were presenting. I saw the rotate your local administrator password that we have in our Dojo. That is an example that I use all the time. I am a huge fan of it. I know that there were some alternatives that got mentioned to this in the chat in the form of privileged access management and another solution that I know is very popular called Auto Elevate. But we'll start with something that, again, is built into Windows that we can use quite easily out of the box in all situations without having to go to a different product. So let's go ahead and first create the custom field that we need in order to store the password. We'll go into devices, we'll go into global custom fields. And if I scroll down here, I've already created the password, but I would go ahead and add a new field in the top right. I would go ahead and call this my local admin password right here. And then in terms of the field type, this is a password. I want it to be a secure field. A secure field is hashed out. It's not visible in plain text, and it does require MFA in order to click to reveal what is contained inside that secure field. And of course, there's auditing around who has looked at that information. Now, when I create this, I have already created that field, but just to give you a visual here, you can see the permissions for scripts. In this particular example, I'm going to use the write only because what we're doing with this script is it's creating our service account that's called MSP admin. It is then generating a random alphanumeric character string as the password. There are other versions of this script, more advanced versions that have been posted in the Dojo that allow you to use passphrases if you'd like, instead of just random alphanumeric characters. So there are a variety of options there. Once that password is then generated, the script writes that back into this secure field. So now you don't have standardized passwords across the board. You can then go into the individual device, which I will do right now. And then within the custom field section, you're going to see my local admin password, custom field that we created. If we come down here, you'll see that local admin password. Again, MFA is required in order to click to reveal that. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly enter my code. And right there, we have that random alphanumeric password. I can go ahead and copy that and use that within a remote access session if I want to. Now, I did this where the script was generating the password and then writing that back into the custom field. If you do want some standardization here of the password, you can do the inverse. You could have a password set in the secure field right here, and instead of having it set to write only, you would have it set to read only. And so that would give you the ability to reference this secure field. It'll be passed down securely to the endpoint, and then you can set a more standardized password. Again, it comes down to what do you want to do, what is best for your environment. So we try to give you a lot of flexibility to make things work the way that you want to. Our final example is going to be detecting and removing unwanted software. We're using as kind of a focal point for this example. If we go into our policies again, we're going to go ahead and use remote access software that might be undesirable. One of the conditions that we have inside of Ninja is a software condition. And what we can do with that is monitor for any installed software in the registry locations that we detect. And so if we come down here, we can see unauthorized remote access software. So we're detecting, in this particular case, LogMeIn, just because this is what I've had experience with in the past. There are, of course, a laundry list of remote access solutions you might want to protect against. Zoho Assist, Tight VNC, Ultra VNC, anything like that. You can go ahead and ensure that only the preferred remote access solution is installed on your endpoints. I will note here that normally this would accept the exact name of the application as it appears within add remove programs. However, in this particular case, I'm using asterisks as wildcards. So I'm looking for anything that happens to have a LogMeIn in the name. Doesn't matter what is on either side of it because I've got the asterisks on both sides. I'll also note here that I'm looking for the presence of logmein as opposed to its absence. And so what I would want to do if we detect that logmein is present is remove it. And so over here on the right, you can see a generic PowerShell script I'm using just to run to find the uninstall string and then execute a quiet uninstallation of logmein. I will say that in the interest of fully remediating your issues, you would want to probably test and confirm that you have a PowerShell script or an uninstaller that you're able to run that is going to um, successfully remove the application. You don't want to get into a situation where you're running something that doesn't work because maybe the application doesn't install in the particular location where you think it's going to be. Maybe it isn't detected software. I can see that there's a question there about potentially standalone applications that might be running as a service. In that case, you have other options here. Oops, let me back out here to monitor for specific services. So instead of looking for the presence of the application being installed, you might look for the service either being up, down, or even just the existence of it. Now, these are a few examples. Obviously, this is far from exhaustive in the IT world, but hopefully this demonstrates that within Ninja, you have a lot of different mechanisms, a lot of different avenues to accomplish whatever security compliance actions that you're looking to put in place. I'll turn it back over to Pete.
Sorry, I'm sitting here like yelling out. Had myself on mute. Lisa, can we switch back to my screen, please? There we go. Thank you so much for those 5 examples, Jeff. I know that was a lot of information. As a reminder, this will be recorded and sent back out so you can duplicate Jeff's efforts. I feel like such a fool for just talking for 5 minutes without having any sound. Because Jeff went through so much, I do like to go through this slide after Jeff talks about automation, because this is kind of a wrap up of the things he did in terms of mechanisms for automation in Ninja. There are really 5 ways to automate things in Ninja. Scheduled scripts in our policies, which let you take action against a device in a policy at a specific time or times. In this case, you're only impacting devices in a policy. That's what sets it apart from scheduled tasks, which allow you to take actions against devices in a group at a specific time, regardless of policy. It's a great way to take regular action like maintenance or regular information collection or monitoring, that sort of thing. We also have script result conditions. We actually didn't touch on that today, but that is a way to run a script at a set frequency and then monitor for the results of that and then take action based on the results. And then 2 others we talked about today: condition triggered script. So something like detect information in an event log, an event ID being triggered, and then run a script. And then finally, custom field triggered scripts. That's the ability to monitor custom field data and then push out an automation based on that. So with these 5 different types of automation mechanisms, you have really robust ability to automate at scale across your environments. With that, for those of you who are not current customers, I do just want to give a brief overview of the NinjaOne Platform. The NinjaOne Platform is called the Unified IT Management Platform, and it gives you centralized, unified IT management, allowing you to manage any device anywhere at scale. The core of our platform is our Unified Endpoint Management, or RMM, solution that gives you monitoring and alerting, patch management, software deployment, and the ability to script and automate, which is where we focused on today. We also do have quite a few add-ons that allow you to extend the value of Ninja. So things like remote access, our endpoint security integrations, our ability to back up endpoints and servers, our fully integrated ticketing solution, and our fully integrated documentation solution. All of these are either Ninja proprietary solutions or integrations with leading third-party solutions like SentinelOne, Bitdefender. For our MSP partners, we have Autotask and Manage and Halo integrations, as well as some others along the bottom there. So our quick pitch for those of you who are not current NinjaOne partners. Now we can go ahead and wrap up with our Yeti giveaway. Lisa, would you hop on and announce our winners?
I would be happy to. So thank you everyone for joining today. We're so excited to have you with us. I have 3 winners in front of me. So I'll go ahead, I'll list them out really quick and then I'll turn it back over to the team. So congratulations to Alec over at Aspire Technical Solutions, as well as Jerry at U Wisconsin. And finally over to Gary at Ferrex Consulting. So congratulations, everyone. I'll reach out to you personally to get your Yeti enhanced for you. Back over to the team.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Can we switch back over to Jeff's screen really quick? And then Jeff can do the heavy lifting from here. So congrats to our winners. We've got about 20 minutes for questions, so make sure you have them in there. I have a couple I wanted to start out with. Jeff, one thing that I think would be really helpful is, can you jump into one script and show the read to write from custom field mechanism?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and see if I have a good example of this in my library. There's one particular simple one that I always like to use just because it makes things very clear. This one utilizes services. You can see here at the top, I am defining a variable. And by the way, this is in PowerShell. I'm defining a variable. That variable is pulling information from a commandlet, the get service commandlet right here. Now that retrieves a lot of information, not all of which I want in this example. So first I'm going to go ahead and sort this alphabetically by name, and then I'm going to select just the name because that's the only information that I really want. Below that, this line right here, we're taking that same variable from above, and then we're going to format it in a table because I like things in lists, but we're going to remove the table headers because those don't look great in the custom fields. Then finally, and this is a very important part here, you do need to convert this into a string. Ninja's custom fields do not accept PowerShell objects directly. So in this case, the get service commandlet would give me information back as a PowerShell object. So I have to convert that to a string. Then the final bit here, I'll go ahead and delete this and show this from scratch. You'll see at the top here, control space to access all of your snippets. I'm going to go ahead and control space here. I'll see all my custom fields. Now you have 2 different options here with the device level custom fields. One is I want to retrieve a value, get a value from a device level custom field, and then use that as a variable within the script. And going back to the example of using the secure custom fields, if you wanted to retrieve something from a secure custom field and use that within your script, this is the option you'd be using. Now, you could also pull from a documentation field, which are hosted at the organization level. Very useful if you want to host site tokens from SentinelOne or any other application that uses a generic installer and then passes a unique package ID at the time of installation using a parameter. Now, both of those good options, but in this particular case, we're using the script to pull information and then write that back into Ninja. So we're actually going to do a set value right here. Once I do the set value, I need to specify the field name, which in this particular case, I named services. I can see it right there. Now, if I hit tab, I'll go to the field value, and the field value is what's going to be what we have stored above. So I'll just go ahead and use the services variable that we created. This is a very basic example. There are certainly more advanced examples in the Dojo. One of my favorites was posted in the chat that I would highly recommend. It checks for any users who have administrator rights and then writes that into a custom field. It's a core bit of the functionality or the demonstration that we show in the advanced automation webinar I mentioned earlier. So highly recommend checking out that script to find anybody who's an admin user and then write that back into a custom field so you can get visibility into the health of your environment.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. A couple just quick troubleshooting tips if you guys are getting started with custom field and automation is make sure that your custom field is readable and or writable depending on what action you want to take. And also that it's assigned to the device that you're running the script on. So if you have a role-based custom field and you have it only assigned to workstations, but you're running the script on a server, it's going to fail. So you have to both have the field on the device and it has to be readable from or writable to. So depending on the action that you're taking. So just a couple quick troubleshooting things that I've run into as I learned this, and I've seen others run into as well. One other follow-up here is there was a question about whether you can do custom fields at an organization level. Can you just briefly show that, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is under our documentation component. So if we go into the documentation section here and turn that on, You'll see that this allows you to create a variety of templates for your various customer organizations inside of Ninja. So in this case, I would go ahead and maybe have an applications template, and then I would create a field that stores, let's say, just a regular text string. Let's say a site token right here. Now, of course, you do want to make this something that you can either read or write, or just read only for your script, so we actually have access to it. And of course, if you want to interact with this via the API, you can also set permissions here. Good to ensure that nobody could potentially go in through the API and view any sensitive information. Now, once we have this information there, I'll go ahead and save that. And then we'll go into an organization. Let's say Omni Consumer Products here. And then we'll go into the documentation section. Now this scales very nicely. However many applications you have, you just add in a brand new document. In this case, I'll go ahead and use SentinelOne just because that's kind of the example I've been putting this as. And there's my site token, real one, much longer, obviously. And then we'll go ahead and save that. Now, just like we saw earlier, I can go ahead and utilize that as a variable within a script. Looks slightly different, but if we go into our script editor here, I'm going to go ahead and define a variable. Let's go ahead and say this is my site token here. If I could type, that would be great. And then I'll go ahead and first select my language. The commands here do change from batch to PowerShell to shell. So you do want to select your language first before doing anything with custom fields. Go ahead and do that get client document value here. What's my template name? It was applications. What is my organization document name? It was SentinelOne. And then what's my field name? It was site token. And so right there, I can now use that site token within my script to install. Maybe I'm using an MSI exec command. This is not the actual command to install SentinelOne, by the way. We do have documentation on that, but I cannot recall it off the top of my head. So we'll go ahead and do site token right there. And then the variable that we have above, probably need to do this in quotes, I imagine. But that would go ahead and be a way for you to pull that from Ninja and then use this script across all your devices to push out SentinelOne. And that, I think, is really the great thing about storing your variables like this in documentation fields, is because you can use one single script across all of your devices, and it's going to have a different installation behavior based on the fact that it's pulling a different variable dependent on which organization it's inside of.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And I did post the documentation for custom fields and documentation, writing to and reading from with CLI and scripting and API, that documentation in our dojo. So you can read more there as well. We do have a very highly voted question here, Stephen, Jeff, for both of you. Will disabling USB using the script that we have built into Ninja, will that disable external drives? Or will it also disable keyboards and mice?
No, this is disabling mass storage only. So it is simply disabling the ability to use it as a mass storage device and transfer files and access the files on the USB device. But keyboard, mice should still work. Stephen, anything else to add?
No, that's pretty much it. So it should cover all USB removable forms of storage.
Awesome. This is a good place to reinforce, we are going to post these scripts to the dojo or links to them. Most of these, if not all of them, are not Ninja created scripts. They are scripts created by our community. We very, very strongly encourage you to test them in non-production devices and validate that they're going to work. And all of the, hey, we're not taking responsibility for these scripts, that I can say in one webinar. So anything that we do post, please make sure you are testing very thoroughly in your environment before you roll them out. I have actually a really good question from Ben Gagnon here. I think, Stephen, maybe this might be a you question. Which is preferable? A bunch of small purpose-built hardening scripts run in a chain as part of a policy, or a few more monolithic scripts that contain multiple hardening items? Really good question.
Yeah, so this definitely depends on the script. If you've got a complex bunch of changes that you need to do in a certain order, certainly keep it to one script. If you're doing something like a onboarding script and you want to break it out into functional components, I would treat them as a kind of break them down by script and then trigger all the scripts in one run. So when you're doing things like conditions or scheduled scripts, you can run multiple scripts in a certain order, and you could break it down via that as well. At least if one script then breaks, you don't have the issue of, you know, your monolithic final script has exited unexpectedly and only 25% of your initial setup or security hardening script is broken.
Here's actually a good place to reinforce. In the last webinar we did on automating device onboarding, we actually had a validation step built in where after each step, or as the last line of any given script, we would actually write an output of success or failure. We'd check that the configuration change went through, and then write to a custom field success or failure. Because you're leaning into automation, a lot of this is going to be zero touch, and so you may not have the visibility. And so you can use custom fields and essentially build a form in custom fields to say, okay, these are my 10 automation steps. I'm going to write success or failure to each of these. And then if it fails, then we're going to create a ticket or an alert. So either way you decide to do it, building validation into your scripts that write to a custom field or in some other way trigger an alert is going to be really helpful for you to troubleshoot. A question from Cody here. What does the Teams integration with Ninja offer, and does it allow us to message end users prior to remoting into the endpoint?
Yeah, so it does not. Our integration with Teams is actually based around webhooks. So if we go into the app section right here, you can see something called notification channels, and this allows you to direct your alerts to outside services. You can see here we have Microsoft Teams set up. This is a webhook, and we do have documentation in our Dojo that explains how to set up these webhooks with Microsoft Teams. So that is the extent of our Teams integration. It revolves around taking alerts that Ninja detects and then sending them into Teams just for easier notification. Once you have your notification channel in here, you would then want to go into your policies. And then inside any of your conditions that you might want to have be directed into Teams, just go ahead and click on the condition, and then you can direct that to a channel. Let's say the print spooler goes down, we can go ahead and direct that into Teams, into Slack. We also have integrations with PagerDuty. And then, of course, anything that accepts an email or an SMS text message or webhook can be an avenue for you to direct your alerts.
Yeah, and these can be really effective if you know your teams are using Slack and Teams heavily to get information to them where they work. You know, if you don't want them to be using their phones, or you know, if email is just going to be too cluttered. I personally find, you know, Slack notifications to be something I'm much more likely to respond to immediately and see immediately. So it can be a really good outlet to get things in front of them where they are. We have two questions. Matt and David asked about essentially, we've talked about a lot of scripts. We've seen a lot of scripts here. We have other things that we want to do. Matt calls out monitoring for users being elevated to have privilege permissions. David talks about using EDR site codes. How can they get access to scripts that help them do some of these things? And I think this is a good pitch for our Ninja Dojo. If Stephen, you want to talk about that a bit, or Jeff.
Yeah, certainly. I think Jeff's going to bring it up anyway, looking at it. But we have a repository of just over 500 scripts in the library. Feel free to have a look around. We don't obviously condone using them in terms of this is an official Ninja script, but we do kind of review them and check them regularly. So, you know, please be aware that we are checking them. Have a look at any scripts that are there that will kind of help you. But there is also kind of the breakdown that's in the documentation section as well. But like I say, I think that's over 500 scripts now. There's a little script share database at the top, and it breaks down some kind of key and regularly used or commented on scripts that we're using. But yeah, there's plenty of examples with where we've broken it down. We've broken it down into key categories. Just dig in there, have a look around, feeling that, use the search bar at the top. You may find you have to filter the search down to only the community script share forum, because often you'll find people will talk about custom fields in sections like the general discussion forum.
Awesome. We've got a good question here from Chris. A little bit funny. I have PTSD from previous experiences with BitLocker. Does anyone actually enable it and trust it? And how is it being managed using Ninja aside from seeing if it's enabled or disabled? Jeff, in the environment you have, we actually have a device with the BitLocker key stored. It's the 8LB device, personal device of mine. So we can show that off. But if we can jump into BitLocker a tiny bit there, I would also love to hear from our customers who are in chat. Are you using Ninja to manage BitLocker? Are you using us to pull in the BitLocker key? Are you using us to enable BitLocker? Would love to hear your experience there.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and take a look at the device level here. So we already showed that Ninja natively detects BitLocker status. So is it enabled or is it disabled? But if we go into the details section of the actual device, you'll see that among the many pieces of information that we're collecting here is going to be our disk volume information. And so for each volume that we see here, we can see that BitLocker is enabled. And then we also have the recovery key. Now, I know that a lot of people store these in Active Directory or maybe in Intune, but I find this to be a very easy way to look at the recovery key. And I'll also say that we automatically pull it. So it is something, there certainly have been situations in the past where somebody said, oh, we didn't have the BitLocker recovery key where we expected to have it, but fortunately Ninja was automatically backing it up. It was stored within the cloud, so we were able to use it. So these are really the two primary components around BitLocker, checking the status. Of course, we can also monitor this as a condition beyond just looking at this as being enabled or disabled. What if BitLocker is locked or unlocked? We can come into our policy here, and that is another condition that we have is the BitLocker status. This does give you more granularity. I know that there was a question earlier about the ability in the search to kind of get more granular with the device types. And you do have that granularity here in the BitLocker status condition. So if you want to exclude removable disks or the boot volume or other volumes, like maybe a RAID, you can absolutely do that. You can configure whether you want to look for this being enabled or disabled, as well as locked or unlocked.
So something that's a good question here maybe is, what's the best way to get the BitLocker key information out of Ninja at scale so we can store it in a third party as well?
So we don't allow that by default. You saw there that the recovery key was something that you had to click into. It wasn't something that we displayed just in plain text in the console. And it's also something that's not included in a reporting. That being said, it's fairly easy to use PowerShell. And in fact, there is an example of how to pull the BitLocker recovery key in the Dojo that Stephen was talking about. And you can use that to write into a custom field. And then once you write that BitLocker key into the custom field, it is something that you can easily export from our search menu. If I go back into Ninja here and then go to the search menu, in the top right, you're going to see an export option. There's two different types of exports to CSV. One is detailed information with a lot of very useful hardware inventory information. And then the second one would be exporting with custom fields. So any of that information you've collected, you can have in a CSV. Another alternative, if you did not want to sort of pare down the CSV to only include BitLocker's recovery key, is utilizing the API to pull that information out.
Awesome. We are.
Sorry, Pete, I'm just going to kick in there as well. If you're going to put it into the custom fields, you could then also use the API to back it up at scale. Separate to that, I would also, if you're using Active Directory, you can back up the keys to that location. And if you're using Azure AD, you can also back it up there as well. As someone said in chat, you can never have enough copies of the keys because ultimately, if you never have that key or you've lost it or suddenly, it's been corrupted in terms of the copy that you have, unless you've got a physical print, you're kind of in a situation where the device is completely unusable and you're going to have to hope for a backup of that data. Sorry,
good context, Stephen. Yeah, we are at time. I do want to wrap up. I do see that there are a couple additional questions that are unanswered. If you're a NinjaOne partner, please reach out to your account manager. They can share those questions and we can try to get you an answer. If you're not, please reach out to your account executive who can try to provide an answer as well. We do hope this was beneficial for you and you enjoyed the webinar. The webinar recording will be sent out shortly, and we will include both the deck and a link to the Dojo with the scripts when we do send that out. So thank you all for joining us. Jeff, Stephen, thank you so much for co-presenting with me, and we hope everyone enjoyed it and have a good day.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.